the start of this episode, we see our hero groaning and complaining while rubbing his shoulder. He feels like the advanced knight should have gone easier on him, but the voice in his head doesn't think so. In fact, it tells him that he's been given a golden opportunity to train with Sir Jaeger. The voice then goes on to remind Vlad that there is a long line of people who would gladly pay to spar with an advanced knight like him, pointing out the value of such an opportunity. Despite the voice's attempt to convince Vlad, the blonde kid still feels like Jaeger just wanted to beat him up. You can't really blame the knight though, because he already thinks that Vlad is a stubborn and arrogant child who doesn't have any respect for his seniors. Our hero makes his point, insisting that Jaeger was only hard on him because he wanted to punish him, but the voice claims that such conditions make the sparring match even better, stating that everyone needs such motivation after all. It makes sense when you think about it, because the motivation to stay alive and not get beaten to death will probably make Vlad fight a lot better. Hearing this, Vlad is speechless for a while, before pointing out that such conditions are pretty upsetting either way. While he's arguing with the voice, someone suddenly whispers from the bushes to get his attention. The boy turns around, and the owner of the voice reveals his location, which happens to be behind a tree. Vlad is quite surprised and confused when he sees that the person is actually Gove. He asks the man when he returned, because he doesn't think the rest of the expedition squad is back yet. Before saying anything, Gove looks around suspiciously, almost like he's scanning the area of any unwanted listeners. When he's sure that the coast is clear and no one is watching, he finally reveals that he's planning to run away from the camp at nightfall. As you'd expect, Vlad finds it unbelievable, so he asks him to explain what the heck he's trying to pull. Gove makes things even more mysterious when he suddenly tells Vlad to remember that he's only visiting him out of concern as a friend. He makes a vague statement, and then suggests that they meet later and have some fun. Not surprisingly, Vlad gets confused because he's starting to think Gove is just saying nonsense at this point. But the man protests that he isn't, and claims that he saw something in the woods with his own eyes. Finally, he tells our hero that the woods they're supposed to explore are cursed. Vlad is alarmed and intrigued upon hearing this, so Gove goes on with his theory. He points out how they've been having a lot of deserters before. However, now, the mercenaries no longer run away because the Bayezid family pays well for their services, and also provides them with all the necessities. Vlad agrees with him, but that's when Gove reveals the real shocker. He claims that those so-called deserters weren't actually deserters. Rather, he believes that they are missing people who were taken away by the cursed woods. At this point, Vlad seems like he's become even more worried. The man claims that he saw it with his own eyes. He saw the ghost that took people into the woods. After a brief moment of silence, Vlad suddenly smacks Gove on the head, calling him a rascal for concocting such unrealistic theories. While receiving a good smacking, Gove tries to convince Vlad that he's telling the truth. Of course, our hero doesn't believe him until he reveals that he saw the knight get taken away the previous night. This time, Vlad immediately knows that Gove is talking about Sir Roderick. The man confirms it as well and reveals that while he was returning, he figured out something incredible, which is the fact that all the missing guys had black hair. A while later after that shocking revelation, we see Gove cursing and swearing in regret. He seems like he's terrified of something, and we quickly find out that it's because his little undercover mission has been foiled. Sir Jaeger arrives on his horse with the rest of the mercenaries, while the dumb idiot leads the way. He quietly curses his own goodwill and regrets not running away with his stuff when he had the chance. Now, everyone knows about the curse in the woods, and he's been instructed to lead them to the place. While Gove mumbles like a coward in front, Jaeger notices his weird nature and asks Vlad if he's sure they can trust him. Our hero admits that he doesn't trust the man at all, but he knows for a fact that he's definitely not crazy. Hearing this, the knight just thinks about how young Master Joseph believes that this little mission is an opportunity. Rather than a worthless expedition, discovering a specific trend in the woods might be a lot more beneficial. However, Jaeger admits to himself that their little investigation bothers him. He thinks about how all the missing people had black hair, and as you'd expect, he's pretty uncomfortable going on such a mission when he also has hair of the same color. Just to confirm, he asks our hero if the information about the hair color is correct. Vlad replies to him, saying that 3 knights are positioned at the post in case something happens. Of course, as an advanced knight himself, Jaeger finds it hard to believe in the abilities of others. Because of this, he realizes that despite his worries about having black hair, he has no choice but to stay in the front as the vanguard. Because Sir Roderick is already missing, it's clear that someone more skilled than him needs to step forward. Jaeger is deep in thought regarding this situation when Gove brings him back to reality by revealing that they've already reached the expedition camp. There, Jaeger meets a man named Irun, who introduces himself as Sir Roderick's subordinate. The knight asks him if he's sure that their captain is nowhere to be found, and whether they have checked the entire forest. Irun responds, confirming that they haven't even found a single trace of the man. He claims that even with ex-hunter mercenaries taking the lead, they couldn't find a single footprint to follow. Hearing this, Jaeger realizes that he has no choice but to check out the woods himself. Still mounted on his horse, he orders the mercenaries to search the area in groups of 3 and spread out as far as the eye can see. Of course, the mercenaries all adhere to his instructions and begin the search. Sometime later, we see Goth trying to challenge Vlad, and doubting his character for ratting him out when he came to him in good faith. Enraged, he calls our hero a fraud, who takes advantage of people's good nature. In response, Vlad just tells him to stop talking and focus on the search, while also promising to compensate him later. The two come across Jaeger, who asks them if they found anything, but Vlad claims that they didn't. The knight gets upset and calls them useless country bumpkins, but our boy defends himself, pointing out that he's from the city. Hearing this, Jaeger asks the boy how he found missing people in the back alleys. Vlad tells him that it's always been pretty simple, because all you had to do was grab someone, and beat them up till they tell you where the missing person is. After hearing this fucked up strategy, Jaeger becomes even more certain that Vlad is really useless. That's when he suddenly notices that the sun is setting, which means that nightfall will soon be here. Not knowing what else to do, he wonders if he should return to the camp. Jaeger ponders on it for a moment and suddenly notices the river. He asks Vlad and Goth if the mercenaries searched beyond the river, and Goth claims that he doesn't recall anyone doing so. After all, it wasn't even in the path of the expedition. The advanced knight thinks about how there's no trace in the woods, even though they've searched it twice already. Which means that there's probably no way for them to find Sir Roderick, or the strange woman that Goth mentioned he saw in the woods. With this in mind, he orders the men to gather around to inform them that they'll be crossing the river. Goth obeys the instruction without hesitation and signals the other mercenaries to gather around. Jaeger takes the first step on the ice and confirms that it isn't completely frozen. Vlad points out that it's probably because winter is over. Either way, he feels that it's strong enough for them to get to the other side of the frozen river. Jaeger agrees with him, but suggests that splitting up and crossing separately will be much safer. The other mercenaries meet up with Goth thinking that he found Sir Roderick. However, he explains that it's not the reason he called them. And this is when Jaeger informs them that they'll have to expand the search area by crossing the river. He admits that it's not completely frozen, and decides that they'll divide themselves into 3 groups before crossing it. Once again, all the mercenaries are on board with the plan and express their agreement. Naturally, it doesn't take long for the prepared soldiers before they split up in groups and walk across the frozen river. Along the way, Goth starts to act strange, which our hero doesn't fail to notice. He asks Goth what's the matter, and the man expresses that he's starting to get a bad feeling that something is about to go wrong. Just like before, Vlad downplays his hunch and just accuses him of being afraid. Goth doesn't even deny the fact that he's scared, and simply admits that he's not as great as Vlad and Jaeger, which is the reason why he has to be careful. He points out that someone like him needs to have a good intuition if they want to survive, and right now, that intuition is telling him that shit is about to go south. The man knows that they shouldn't be crossing the river, and after he makes his point, Vlad responds by admitting that even though he doesn't know about intuition, he's certain about something else. The terrified mercenary just stares at him with a confused expression as he waits for Vlad to finish his statement. Our hero finally speaks, and reveals that what he knows for sure is that if Goth runs back now, his death won't be pretty. He bluntly threats to kill the mercenary if he tries to escape, because he's their only clue to find the missing people. Goth is terrified after hearing this, and Vlad just tells him to quit talking about his hunch because crossing the river is his only way of survival. Our hero then gets on the ice and asks Goth to follow him, even though the mercenary hasn't changed his mind, but he now realizes that he has no choice but to cross like everyone else. He takes his first steps and starts shaking, thinking that the ice could break any moment. At this point, Vlad is fed up with the man's cowardly behavior and assures him that even if the ice doesn't break, he'll break it himself and dump him in water if he keeps rambling. In a magnificent display of cowardice, Goth starts crawling on the floor in an attempt to not break it. He claims that he can't cross the river, and a pissed-off Vlad just pulls him by the shirt and asks him to get up because they're the only ones left behind. The moment Vlad tries to pull Goth up, he starts screaming in terror like a maniac. Vlad gets even more upset by his antics, but realizes why he screamed when he looks into the water. You see, the mercenary was horrified to see the corpses. He flips out and screams at the top of his lungs so the others can hear him, as he informs everyone that there are dead bodies in the river. All of a sudden, the dead men beneath the ice appear to be swimming up, and then the ice starts to break. Without understanding what the fuck is going on, all of the mercenaries start to panic. They start running on the ice, hoping they can make it to the banks before it's too late. While the men run to safety, the zombies break through the ice and emerge from the river. Unfortunately for the squad, they don't make it off the ice in time and find themselves surrounded by the dead. The zombies start crawling toward them, and the confused mercs ask Sir Jaeger what they should do. It's at this point that the knight finally realizes that the whole mission was a trap to begin with. After all, it's almost as if the zombies were aware of their arrival and laid down an ambush. Unfortunately, they fell right into this trap, and found themselves stuck in night and darkness, the territories that were never meant for the living. While Vlad, Jaeger, and the other mercenaries are confronted by the undead army, the scene shifts back to the main camp. There, we see the priest praying to the Lord and thanking him for looking after his people. With the little priest in training by his side, he prays to the Lord to guide them with his light so that they can stay on the righteous path. All of a sudden, the priest stops praying, and the boy kneeling beside him becomes worried. He calls out to the priest, and suddenly, the place starts to shake. The water in a chalice starts to rumble as well until it floats out and starts moving in the air, leaving the priest in a state of bewilderment. The dark water continues to move in the air until an ominous woman appears. She emerges from the dark fog that forms around the camp and starts walking around to look for her child. The fog surrounds this strange woman as she walks around the whole camp. Meanwhile, back on the icy battlefield, we see that a massive fight has blown out between the living and the dead. Unfortunately, the man they came looking for has already been transformed into a zombie and is now mindlessly fighting against his former men. The undead Sir Roderick roars as he tries to hit the cowardly Gove, and rather than running away or standing up to the enemy before him, Gove just screams like a lady, probably thinking it would make some difference. Thankfully, before his former captain can end his life, Vlad arrives just in time to save him by slashing zombie Roderick with his sword. Unfortunately, the moment he does that, the other agitated zombies charge at him with blistering speed. Our hero quickly sees them coming and braces himself for another round. As his eyes begin to glow like a white walker once again, Vlad strikes a beautiful sword stance to get ready. With mind-boggling speed, he slashes all the zombies in his path. Meanwhile, the coward just screams in fear as the severed body parts of the zombies fly all around him. Not for the first time, Vlad gets irritated by Gove's behavior, so he calls him a rascal and instructs him to get up and fight with a spear. Of course, the mercenary insists that he can't do it, he's too terrified to fight the dead. Vlad gets angry at this, because the grown-ass man is now practically a liability on the battlefield. He curses in his mind, but the voice in his head tries to calm him down. It tells him not to get worked up, and advises him to pick a direction before making any attempt to escape. Hearing this, Vlad looks forward and sees 3 zombies coming out of the water with their gaze locked on him. Naturally, that makes it clear that he can't go forward. Now he's starting to wonder if Sir Jaeger is safe either, because the both of them got separated during the ambush. Elsewhere on the ice, we see the senior knight effortlessly slicing up the zombies like he's making an undead salad. Unfortunately, even a great knight like him gets tired at some point, and when he sees a zombie take out one of his men right in front of him, he admits that there's no end to the undead men. At this point, he can't help but thinks that whoever thought of the trap had already planned everything out in advance. Even though he doesn't know who was the mastermind, but he's certain who the intended target is supposed to be. With that in mind, Jaeger's left eye begins to glow with a green color underneath his eye patch. He decides that there's no time to hesitate, and his sword begins to glow as well. It appears that he's using aura, because his eyes and sword are glowing with the same color. The aura surrounds the knight, and by using the power, he's able to take on all the zombies confronting him, annihilating all of them in a single go. In a bright and insanely epic display, Jaeger wipes the floor with the undead. The spectacle is so intriguing that other mercenaries on the ice stop to watch the legend do his thing. They're delighted to see him in action, and are even more motivated to fight after seeing that they have someone like him on their side. In the middle of his intense fight, Jaeger calls out to Vlad, asking him to fulfill his contract. Our hero, who is dealing with another zombie, is alarmed when he hears the knight calling out to him. While fighting off the undead men around him, he yells back to Sir Jaeger, asking the advanced knight what he wants him to do. Surprisingly, the plan turns out to be very simple. He just wants Vlad to defend the right post for as long as he can. He tells him to fulfill his contract as a hired sword and protect young Master Joseph at all costs. Without hesitation, Vlad receives the order and fights the remaining zombies in his path to find his way out of the icy battlefield. As he runs out, he tells the cowardly idiot to come with him, who's already yelling for him to wait. While Vlad leaves the battlefield, we see that Sir Jaeger's left eye is glowing so brightly that it produces a green flame underneath his eye patch. The advanced knight prays to the Lord, hoping for our hero to reach in time to protect the young master. I swear, this guy is the epitome of what a knight should be. He's practically surrounded by the dead who want to end his status as a living being, and yet all he can think about is the safety of the one he serves. The knight then resumes his battle, slashing the undead creatures one after the other. Eventually, he hears a growl behind his back, and even though he's very occupied while dealing with other undead warriors, Jaeger manages to sense the new presence. He quickly turns around to face the threat, and when he does, he sees that it's the zombified version of Sir Roderick. The knight apologizes to his former comrade for being late in his rescue, but zombie Roderick and the rest of the undead army are already beyond saving as they aim for his life. Meanwhile, back at the main camp, young Master Joseph is sitting in his tent alone, looking pretty bored as usual. Even though he's reading a book, you can tell that he probably wants to be elsewhere. Suddenly, he's interrupted when he hears someone yelling. So, like any normal person, Joseph is alarmed and wonders who made the noise. He then hears the person telling someone or something to get away from him, and that's when it clicks in his head. He realizes that the camp is being invaded. Joseph gets up from his chair and prepares to leave, but then someone enters the room and calls out to him. The young master turns to the person and sees that it's one of his men, Vorden. The young master asks Vorden what the commotion is all about, but the guy is still trying to catch his breath, so he stutters. It appears that he doesn't even have an explanation, so Joseph gets upset and asks him if he ran into his tent without first finding out what is actually happening. Vorden is guilty as charged, but he pretends like that's not the case and claims that he ran into the master's chambers to check if he's safe. He claims that Joseph's safety is of utmost priority, but the young master knows that he's lying. Even if nothing else was going to give it away, the fact that Vorden ran into the tent without a sword or weapon proves that he didn't come to protect the young master. Joseph confronts him for not arming himself before coming, and Vorden's empty sheath is now on full display, finally making him realize that his sword is missing. If this had been any other regular day, the young master threatens that he would have hanged this imbecile. Hearing this, Vorden immediately starts begging for forgiveness, and while that's happening, Father Andreas and some other men enter the tent as well. Joseph asks the priest if he knows what's going on, and before he can even finish his question, Father Andreas tells him that something evil has visited the camp. The priest opens his texts and asks Joseph to come take a look at his Bible written with holy ink. The young master is shocked and confused when he looks at the pages and sees the writings inside trembling like a leaf in a storm. He finds it very concerning, and Father Andreas admits that it's no ordinary object. The uneasy young master asks the priest if there's a way they can stop it, but the father simply replies that he's not an exorcist. Even then, he assures Joseph that he will try to unleash all of his divine powers to ward off the evil. But despite that, he admits that the being they're currently facing is so evil that he might not be of much help. This makes Joseph more nervous, and he starts thinking deeply of a possible solution. Joseph knows that none of the remaining knights can be of much use, but he realizes that they are his last line of defense. As such, he gets up and instructs the knights present to come with him and help him take down the enemy. He takes the lead, and they follow behind him with straight faces, suggesting that they're ready for business. When Joseph comes out of his tent, he's shocked to see the thick fog covering almost everything in sight. Unfortunately, this fog is more ominous than he could ever have imagined. It turns out that the fog not only covers the vision of mercenaries at the camp, it also possesses them and forces them to fight for control over their bodies. The strange woman from earlier is certainly responsible, because the men seem to be possessed by a spirit that calls them her children. Even though they try to fight it, there's not much they can do against the supernatural. While covering his nose to avoid inhaling it, Joseph asks Father Andreas if the fog makes people delirious. The priest doesn't know exactly what it does, but one thing he's sure of is that it's not a natural phenomenon. Unfortunately, it doesn't take too long before this dangerous fog gets to them. Joseph realizes that he's inhaled it, and starts to hear the strange spirit call him her child. It soon enters the systems of the priest and the other, and they all experience the same phenomenon. The spirit woman continues searching for her child around the camp, and the moment they see her, they're horrified by her vile appearance. With her long black hair and her creepy white gown, she walks barefoot in the middle of the fog, and continues to look around the place. She keeps searching for her child, and when she turns to Joseph, she asks if her child is there. The moment she looks at the young lord, the men around him become terrified at the sight of the apparition's face. Joseph, on the other hand, just stands there speechlessly with his napkin in hand. The witch's black mouth and eyes widen as she screams and yells that she's finally found her child, who appears to be none other than the young master himself. The story has taken an insane turn in the supernatural, and I am a full-blown fan of some horror and action. That of course means that I can hardly wait for the new chapters to come out. Terrifying witch lady stretches out her hands and charges at our hero and the others, while screaming desperately for her boy child. But suddenly, there's a barrier in front of her. We see that Father Andreas is on his knees praying, as a magical shield forms to keep the witch out. But while he's doing that, his horrified little priest in training is screaming and crying the whole time because of how scared he is. The young master just stands within the magic barrier, and wonders if in the end, there's no other way for Sir Jaeger to face the possessed lady trying to attack them. The reason he's so worried is that two of his strongest knights, Cade and Maxim, have already been taken out by the witch because they weren't capable enough to defeat her, even with the outstanding blessings of Father Andreas. While he's deep in thought, the witch continues to slam the magical shield, desperately trying to get in, because for some reason, she believes her child is inside. As she pushes her hand through the shield, her fingers begin to burn away, but it doesn't stop her. And upon seeing how relentless she is, Joseph concludes that this whole situation is a spiteful curse that has been aimed at him by some unknown enemy. Meanwhile, Father Andreas continues to hold the shield, but when he sees the little boy, Jean suddenly coughs out blood, and he gets worried and distracted. He looks back at the boy and tries to comfort him, telling him to hang in there, and assuring him that the sun shall find its way to him. So, the boy summons all the courage to endure the pain, and he joins the priest in prayers by singing hymns so that they can make the barrier stronger. Despite their brave efforts, the young master can't shake off the feeling that it's only a matter of time before Father Andreas gets exhausted, because he's definitely reached his limits. Even worse, the hymns will soon stop, so it makes him even more concerned and fear for his life. As the supernatural battle of wills goes on, Joseph watches closely and begins to come up with a plan because he feels like the night is too long to wait for the sun to rise. But while he's thinking, he's suddenly drawn back to reality when he sees a familiar figure lunging at the witch from behind. Yep, it's none other than our blonde-haired hero, who's literally flying toward the possessed lady with his glowing blue sword in hand. The witch doesn't sense his presence, so she doesn't turn around to face him. But even at that, Vlad is forced to stop his attack when the voice tells him that the witch is animated by the curse, and that a normal sword can't cut through her. As such, our hero stops and hides behind a rock to ask the voice what they should do to defeat her, and the voice asks in return if he can currently use any aura. However, Vlad quickly points out that he can't, so the voice becomes confused. But after a brief pause, it reveals that there's another way to defeat such an enemy, and of course, the blue-eyed kid is curious to find out. That's when the voice suddenly asks Vlad to let him borrow his body for a while. In other words, he's going to possess him and do the job himself. But upon hearing this, our boy becomes concerned and asks if such a thing is even possible. In response, the voice reveals that he's certain he can use auras, but what he doesn't know is if he'll be able to manifest them within the blonde-haired hero's body. And he fears that even if he succeeds at it, he won't be able to move for a while, which is never a good thing in a heated battle against a powerful enemy. The voice honestly tells Vlad that he doesn't recommend such a risky plan, but the young hero knows that if he can't kill the witch, then she'll certainly kill him. And to him, that's enough reason to take some drastic actions. Even though the voice makes it clear to Vlad that the way of the sword is dangerous, he agrees to let him borrow his body. He asks Vlad if he's sure he wants to do it, and the hero reveals that he made a promise to Joseph. And now that he has something he must do, he's vowed to devote himself not with loyalty, but with faith. After hearing him say this, the voice respects his decision, and then the plan is set in motion with Vlad charging at the enemy once more. This time, she senses his presence and turns around to face him, and while our boy is in the air, the voice starts to take over his body. It tells him to close his right eye, and he does, so it doesn't take long before his possession begins. The voice transports Vlad's consciousness to a place he calls the world of voices, and after that happens, our hero's body begins to glow brightly just like his sword, as it becomes filled with aura. Using this power, Vlad suddenly gets close enough to the witch, and with great force, he cuts through her like a piece of bread. Everyone around is shocked to see this, and they all gasp in disbelief. But while they're doing that, Vlad falls to his knees and starts yelling in pain, because the voice is still sending powerful surges of energy into his body. The young master sees this and becomes extremely worried, so he calls out to the hero, hoping to get his attention. But all of a sudden, Vlad's eyes turn white, and he calms down. Even though the blonde-haired kid is no longer screaming in agony, he's certain that what he just saw were traces of aura. And although he doesn't know how he achieved it, he's certain that the young kid must have paid a huge price for it. His thoughts are interrupted when he sees the witch getting back up and starting to call out for her missing child again. Unfortunately, our hero is still weak and unable to move because of the possession. On top of that, the witch is stretching her hand toward him. Determined to save him, Joseph rushes out and tells Father Andreas not to stop the hymns, but they're so shocked at his sudden decision that they try to call him back. The young master quickly gets to Vlad and helps him to get up, while encouraging him to hold on to him. We see our hero groaning in pain, but he manages to move slowly with Joseph before the witch can get to him. Enraged that he got away, she gets back up and grabs a hold of Joseph's leg before he can run away. The young master tries to free himself from her grip, but he finds it extremely difficult, making him think that he's a weakling who's not even capable of getting out of this situation. Just when Joseph feels like it might be over for him, Borden grabs his cloak from behind and pulls him out of the witch's grasp, tossing the young master and our hero to the other side where the priest is. The angry witch yells in rage and despair once this happens, and as Joseph lands on the floor safely, he admits that this is the first time he's glad to have Borden by his side. Of course, the knight is happy to receive validation from his master, so he thanks Joseph. And while the two are exchanging kind words, our favorite blonde-haired swordsman picks up his blade. From the way he's groaning, it's obvious that he's not fully recovered. But that doesn't matter to him, because he suddenly asks Father Andreas to bless his sword, implying that he's ready to go back into the battlefield. Vlad insists that they have to send off the creepy witch, so after a brief pause, the priest agrees with him and decides to do it. Suddenly, he presses his palm against the edge of the blade, allowing it to cut him. And as his blood is smeared all over it, he presents it to our hero, informing him that he's just given him a firm blessing. Immediately, Vlad takes it from the priest, thanking him for his blessing, before walking back into the action. As our boy bravely heads out to face the evil witch and finish her for good, Father Andreas and Jean watch anxiously from behind, praying for him to come out victorious. The injured witch is still lying on the floor and unable to get up, so when Vlad finally gets to her and stands over her with his sword, she begins to beg him, but not exactly for mercy or to spare her life. But rather, she's begging him to find her missing child. Looking at the horrific and nightmarish face of the woman, he sees something unexpected, even though it is only for an instant. Vlad sees a memory of women locked up in a dark prison. While the women were incarcerated, their children were placed outside the cages and laid on the cold floor to die. They begged for their children to be returned to them, but unfortunately, that never happened. Rather, what Vlad sees in the horrifying memories of this woman is that she could do nothing but wail in agony as her child was freezing to death right in front of her eyes. Just like she does now, the woman stretched out her bruised hands from the iron bars, trying to reach her child in vain. At this moment, our hero finally understands the woman's pain and why she's been cursed with the burden of searching for her child for eternity. However, he believes that it's time for her suffering to end, so he takes out his sword and buries it in her head, telling her to rest in peace. As the blood flows down her face, the monstrous demeanor she's had for so long suddenly disappears, and she reverts to her human form. With tears rolling down her face, she looks up at the hero, thinking that perhaps he might be her child all along. While Vlad is busy exorcising the curse, the scene shifts to somewhere else, and we see an ominous-looking hooded man sitting in the forest with a strange box between his legs. Judging by the dark aura surrounding the man and the black mysterious fog he's conjuring, it's easy to conclude that this guy is probably responsible for all the paranormal shit that has been going on recently. The evil man continues to control the dark fog, and as he nurtures it to grow bigger, a sick twisted smile appears on his face to confirm that he's definitely a villain. Just when the dark cloud is about to grow as big as he wants, the stuff starts to disappear, and he's instantly alarmed. This villain is shocked at what just happened, because he's probably never had his plans foiled before. But unfortunately for him, today isn't going to be one of his better days. Confused by the fog's disappearance, he concludes that the evil thoughts he's been feeding off from the desperate woman have suddenly stopped. That's right, the moment our hero stabbed the woman in the head and reverted her to her normal self, this weirdo's spell was automatically neutralized. As a result, the sorcerer begins to imagine that someone must have defeated the puppet he's been controlling, and the thought of it bothers him a lot, because he can't even imagine anyone on Earth strong enough to do something like that. However, he suddenly remembers that there's only one knight who knows how to use aura that efficiently. But before he can even say the name, the man responsible appears in front of him, and we find out that it's actually none other than the green-eyed advanced knight, Sir Jaeger. He reveals himself to the evil sorcerer and confirms that his suspicions were correct, because he's finally seen the rat controlling the puppet. As the evil wizard sees Jaeger standing in all his might, with aura covering his entire body, he begins to shiver in fear. The guy looks like he's about to pee his pants, because he knows just how dangerous the man before him is. Jaeger plans to finish off the sorcerer for all the trouble he's caused, and of course, the evil magician also knows that he's done for. However, before we can see the advanced knight unleash the punishment, the scene cuts and we're fast-forwarded to the time where Jaeger is meeting with the young master. When the advanced knight arrives, Joseph asks him if the face he's looking at belongs to the one controlling death from darkness. And that's about the same time we find out that this brooding knight with no chills decapitated the sorcerer, and is now presenting the head to his master. While holding the bloody head by the hair, Sir Jaeger replies, saying that it seems that he's the one. Apart from that discovery, Jaeger also believes that the box that the headless man had is probably the cursed object that the woman from the previous night came looking for. With the head in one hand, and the chest box in the other, the knight concludes that the box itself became the woman's missing child's coffin. After receiving the heartbreaking news, the young master instructs Sir Jaeger to hand the box over to Father Andreas so that he can investigate the matter when they return to Varna. Of course, the ever-loyal knight acknowledges the order and assures his master that he'll do it. But before he leaves, Joseph engages him in conversation for a bit. The young master talks about how the expedition, which was supposed to solidify his power, turned out to be a complete failure. And of course, Jaeger agrees with him, admitting that he's also ashamed of the way things turned out. The two men stand on a cliff, and Joseph looks down at the camp below, before stating again that he surely failed. Nevertheless, he decides that they have to return home while treading with light steps. And the moment he says this, Jaeger suddenly asks him if he found the blonde hero useful. Joseph looks at the knight with a side eye for a brief moment, before a knowing grin appears on his face. And then, he reveals that he thinks he might have found the person who would replace him as the sword. The young master begins to recall the magical things he saw the previous night, and begins to say that our blonde-haired hero will grow up to become a swordsman, who shines brighter than anyone. We see a glimpse of the image Joseph has in mind, and let me tell you, it is most certainly glorious. Vlad stands in the middle of blue flames and sparks, as the pure power of aura is manifested in his body. However, that majestic and powerful appearance doesn't really stay for so long. And when it wears off, well, what you'll be left with is a messed up and exhausted blonde kid. The scene shifts, and we see Vlad waking up finally, with his hair looking like a bird's nest where the chicks were fighting, and his pupils looking small like those of someone under the influence. It appears that the shocked look on his face is because he's just been told that he passed out for 3 days, and that he's just waking up. He can't believe it, so he asks the voice in his head to confirm. And of course, the guy up there casually confirms it, advising him to be more careful in the future. As the voice goes on to say he didn't expect the recoil to be so extreme, Vlad just sits in bed like a zombie, still stunned by what he's just been told. Soon enough, he manages to shake off the feeling of shock and admits that it's a relief either way. Because now, he wants to wrap up matters at the camp so that he can return right away with the others. When he says this, the voice informs him that Joseph and the others are actually waiting for him to recover before setting off on their journey back. As our hero uses the sword to anchor himself and sit up, the voice also informs him that the young master seemed to care quite a lot about him. Vlad manages to get on his feet and goes outside. But when he pulls the covers of his tent out of the way, he realizes that there's no one around because the camp is completely deserted. Initially, he's surprised to see this, but then he quickly concludes that it makes sense for them to run away after seeing what went down the previous night. However, our boy realizes that he was too quick to jump to conclusions when he hears the familiar voice of Goth calling to him from behind. Vlad turns around, and the cowardly mercenary starts talking about how worried he was because of the blonde hero. Hearing this, Vlad is unable to hide his joy. He immediately starts teasing Goth for how he wanted to run away before, but ended up being the one who stayed back the longest. Even though most of the mercenaries have fled the Bayezid camp, Goth agreed to stay back with a few others. The reason was simple, and it's the fact that they were promised a raise in their payments until they return. Just then, Goth starts telling Vlad about his moments of bravery, like how he was the one who brought the blonde hero back to the camp when he couldn't ride his horse, and how he went back into the dangerous forest for the Lord Knight. It turns out that the reason he's saying all of this isn't even to impress Vlad or anything, but it's simply because he wants our hero to put in a good word for him and make him look good in front of the young master later. Of course, Vlad nonchalantly tells the merc that he'll try his best to do so. Suddenly, the mercenary remembers that Sir Jaeger asked him to summon our hero when he woke up. And since Joseph is in the barracks, he urges Vlad to hurry up so he can have enough time to say good things about him. As soon as our boy hears this, he turns around and bids Goth goodbye, but the merc just reminds him again so he doesn't forget. At this point, Vlad is getting pissed off by his behavior, and he starts to wish that God would just make him shut up. Just then, the scene shifts, and we're taken to Joseph's tent where we see him hosting Vlad. While pouring a glass of red wine, he tries to make small talk and ask our hero if he can drink. I don't really know his real age either, but my man assures the young master that he can hold his liquor, pointing out that he used to work in a brothel and a bar. Even though he's had a taste of alcohol, he admits that he's never had fine liquor before. And upon hearing this, Joseph reveals that the bottle in his hand contains a nobleman's drink. Before pouring Vlad a glass, the young master claims that he wants to thank him first, because he knows that the boy could have just run away when things got rough, but instead, he decides to stay and fight till the end. Hearing this, the blonde kid bluntly reminds Joseph that they had a contract after all. But in response, the young master points out that Vlad promised him faith and not his loyalty. As the boy's blue eyes stare at him, he thinks about how the contract was nothing more than mere words at the time. And yet, the kid fulfilled his promise and held up his end of the agreement. Because of this, Joseph decides that Vlad is a talent he can't afford to lose. But then, he suddenly corrects himself and confirms that the kid is more than that, because he's actually a talent he must have on his side. Finally, after thinking about all of this, Joseph pushes a glass of wine to Vlad and tells him that it's time for him to fulfill his own part of the contract. But this time, he's going to reward our hero as per his accomplishments. On this note, the young master formally invites Vlad to join the powerful house of the Bayezid family as a reward. The scene shifts, and we see the beautiful county of Bayezid, called Varna. Joseph and the others have returned, and while they're still settling in, Sir Jaeger informs him that the mercenaries have been dismissed. Hearing this, the young master tells him he's done a good job. He informs his men that the report for the expedition is pending, and as a result, they'll have to stay in Varna for a day or two. Vlad seems to be overwhelmed by the beauty of the place, because he's constantly turning his neck to look around. And when Jaeger notices this, he asks him if it's his first time in the county. In response, the blonde kid just explains to him that it would always be his first time anywhere he goes. After all, he had never before left his miserable slums. This statement earns him the snide and a funny nickname of the country bumpkin, which Jaeger gives him right away. When Joseph hears this, he tells Vlad to take the day off and look around the county, which our hero is very thankful to hear. Before Jaeger leaves with Joseph, he tells Vlad not to get lost in the city and instructs him to be at the city hall by nightfall. Clearly, our boy didn't like Jaeger before, but now, after getting constantly scolded and mocked, he feels like he's starting to really hate the advanced knight. On the contrary, the voice in his head tells him that Jaeger probably likes him as much as Joseph does, but Vlad thinks that any more of the knight's tough love might just get him killed. Our hero shakes off the thought and decides to go get a delicious greasy meal with his fat payment after such a long time. While he's wondering what kind of food they have in Varna, someone tugs on his arm, and he's surprised to see Jean when he turns around. The cute kids gleefully say that the priest would like to see him if he doesn't already have any major plans for the day. Soon, we see the two standing in front of a massive church, and Vlad admits that even the churches in Soara weren't as big. Jean informs him that even though Sturma is the capital, Varna is the religious center of the kingdom. Jean then asks him to wait inside while he gets the priest, and the moment our boy walks into the church, his jaw drops to the floor at the sight of the magnificently beautiful structures inside the building. At that moment, Vlad realizes that even though he's been going by the name of Praying Rimmon, he hasn't ever said a proper prayer. And as such, he starts to feel guilty, believing that he's somehow committed a sin. Just then, Father Andreas arrives and apologizes for keeping him waiting, but the good-mannered hero tells him it's no problem and thanks him for the invitation. The priest laughs it off and presents him with an ID token, claiming that even though Joseph would have managed fine on his own, tokens from the church are most effective. After all, the Lord's favor spreads across the continent. Vlad is even more surprised when he looks at the token and sees that his guarantor is Father Andreas himself, but the priest brings him out of his daze by giving him the permission to come find him in the church whenever he needs to, because henceforth, he's our hero's guarantor within the city. The blonde kid is speechless upon hearing this, because he never imagined that a back alley kid, who couldn't even have his birth registered, would one day have a sincere guarantor who wrote his name down in this vast world. Overwhelmed by the kind gesture, our hero kneels before the priest to show his gratitude. Because from this day forward, he's no longer Vlad from the back alleys, but rather, he's Vlad of Soara. Once again, this manhwa keeps giving you more and more to look forward to. I've been thoroughly immersed in the progress of our hero so far,